So today I'm going to talk about artificial intelligence regulation, specifically in the European Union. My research has been on human rights, but most people would know me, if they know me at all, for my research on truth and reconciliation commissions. And the way that I ended up doing this kind of research has to do with me wanting to learn a little bit more coding to use for research, for methodological purposes. And then one thing led to another. I was taking summer courses at Seattle University. They call it a boot camp, coding boot camp. And then, 3 years later, I ended up having a master's in computer science. But while that was happening, I became increasingly more aware of, some of the problems with emerging technologies and, their risks and harms. I realized that, it's in some ways very different from what I'd been doing all along, but it's in some other ways it's actually quite similar in that there's a walk of life in which the possibility for human rights violations is very much there, and there are calls for legal regulation, yet the law itself is, basic socio-legal insight. The law in the books and the law as lived reality could be quite separate from one another. And so that's what led me to this line of research. And the European Union in particular because, it's the first region that has given some serious thought and actual action, also engaged in action to regulate, emerging technologies. I think that's going to be different maybe in about, 5 years' time, in a decade's time. Definitely Canada is catching up now, in its own different way. But when I started doing this kind of research, the European Union was pretty much the pioneer. So my motivation in writing the paper that guides this presentation was to describe and explain how lawmakers and other stakeholders understand a technology like AI and its challenges and influence the process and outcome of legislation on AI ethics. So in a way, trying to understand how policy works in this specific line of work, which is technology regulation. So, one premise is that legal regulation of AI is on the rise, so we're going to hear more about this. And the other thing is that legal regulation is likely to reflect, one, the lawmakers' interpretations of the relationship between law and technology, but in addition to them, businesses, civil society organizations, and citizens' interpretations as well. And then I also believe that the politics of legislation in this area is quite complex, and so those are the premises guiding the presentation. So my main argument is that pluralistic, socio-technical, imaginaries, and I'm going to define all of that, but pluralistic, socio-technical, imaginaries, mouthful, contest. The three things, one, the essential characteristics of technology as they relate to social and political problems. Two, whether, how, and how much law can enable, direct, or constrain scientific and technological developments. And three, the degree to which law can, does, or should intervene into scientific and technological controversies. So, I guess the way that I'm imagining this is more like a triangle of scientific technological developments, the law, and everything else that happens in society, all the social, political, economic, cultural processes that we have, in addition to scientific, technological, or legal, political ones. Now, I would like to define the operative term here, which is socio-technical imaginaries. It comes from science and technology studies, and specifically Sheila Jasanoff's work and co-authored work, where they define the term as collectively imagined forms of social life and social order reflected in the design and fulfillment of nation-specific scientific and or technological projects. So in other words, what they're saying is that policymakers imagine some sort of a relationship between science and technology on the one hand and everything else going on in society, on the other hand. And that imagination shapes how they come up with policy. And so the original term is very much about national science and technology policy. And it's very much steeped in the cultural sociology tradition. So, the idea is that the kind of meaning that people, and in this particular case, policymakers, put into imagining science and technology ends up having real-world consequences in terms of policy. And then, this is coordinated by government institutions. And so, that's the institutions do the work of translating imaginary into something more concrete, such as policy. Now, what I would like to add to that is the term pluralistic, pluralistic socio-technical imaginaries, because I think in something like AI regulation, for example, there isn't really one sort of national policy. I think that is a sort of a very homogenizing, uniform way of thinking. Rather, there are multiple imaginaries, and so stakeholders have actually particular imaginaries. And I also believe that this is not just a cultural resource, but it's very much a strategic one. So, imaginaries are very much about interests and strategies as much as they are about meanings. I also believe that these imaginaries incorporate the law as a ubiquitous presence. So whether or not there is actual legislation on an issue, whenever we think about science and technology, we always already think about whether or not the law is there or how much the law is there. The common trope about talking about AI regulation, say in the United States, is that there is no AI regulation, there is no internet regulation, or it's as little as possible. But that already assumes the presence of law, even if it's permissive or minimalist. And so, that's why I say socio-technical imaginaries interact with socio-legal ones. And then finally, I believe that pluralistic socio-technical imaginaries serve as a field of contestation over three things. One, characteristics of technology. So in other words, do people assume that certain technologies have certain characteristics, right? Like AI. Well, some people say, well, it's unprecedented. It's going to transform the way we live. And then others are a lot more critical. So, that's a site of contestation there, right? The second thing is, of course, the desired law, the content and form of the law that is desired to regulate this technology. And then the third one is, it's a bit more complicated, at least, the way I see it, is the nature of legal intervention into scientific or technological expertise. Typically, lawmakers are very uncomfortable about, trying to intervene into sort of scientific debates. Yet, legislating on science and technology sometimes requires making certain statements about the inherent features of science and technology as well, and something that we're going to get into. So far, I think a lot of what I discussed was very sort of theoretical, intramural debates in the academia. I like intramural debates in academia. Some of my favorite debates are intramural debates in academia. But I also believe that there's going to be sort of an important concrete reason why these debates matter, and that is in particular the European Union's Artificial Intelligence Act. So. What I'm hoping to do is understand socio-technical imaginaries as an empirical question. So, what are these different socio-technical imaginaries? Where do they come from, and how do they interact with one another? And my case study is the EU's AI Act that was proposed by the Commission in 2021 that very recently got a preliminary approval in the European Parliament. So I think later this year there is going to be a trilogue between the Council, the Commission, and the Parliament, and if all of that goes through, we could have legislation by the end of the year that will come into effect in 2025. The data sources I'm using are, one, the text of the Act itself, and then 302 response papers addressing the Act. So maybe I should talk about this a little bit. The Commission of Europe, or the European Commission, the executive body of the European Union, has an online portal the Have Your Say portal, where citizens, business associations, businesses themselves, NGOs, trade unions, even foreign companies can voice their opinion about a piece of legislation, proposed legislation. And so at the final stage, the Commission received 302 responses for the AI Act. And that's what I'm analyzing. Most of what I'm doing is comparative content analysis, but I am also using a topic model to get a sense of the degree of correspondence between the act on the one hand and then different stakeholder sort of priorities on the other. So I'll start with the text itself. Oops, did I? Okay. The text itself. So the proposed legislation, and I find this quite interesting, the proposed legislation does not use terms like disruptive, unprecedented, novel at all in defining artificial intelligence. Again, this goes against a lot of the sort of the popular tropes. And there is a reason, and the reason is the European Union, at least the Commission, I think has this alternative imaginary where they say that they can control, regulate artificial intelligence fully without worrying about any unprecedented sort of inherent nature of technology. They also, while the law itself actually relies on a sort of a risk assessment formulation, so there are 4 different levels of risk, low, medium, high, and intolerable. And so, you know, some applications will be banned altogether, but a lot of what the law actually regulates is high risk applications of AI. Anyways, so what they call risk, I think, is in some ways a calculable sort of likelihood of negative impact rather than something truly unpredictable. And so again, this idea of closure, or the possibility of closure, is built into the act. And then the third thing is they use these 2 concepts all the time: 1, future-proof legislation, and 2, technology-neutral legislation or regulation. And again, the idea is that the Commission wants to project a sense of control over technology, that it's actually controllable not only today but also all the way into the future, no matter how technology changes. And the kind of law that they put out there is supposed to bring legal certainty, and so it's going to be good for business. And in fact, this logic of market friendliness is all over the place, in the text of the regulation. And also, a second pillar is the protection of fundamental rights, as defined by EU norms. And then, what it does is primarily adopt a risk-based approach, as I said earlier, for regulating private sector practices. So the only public sector element is the designation of remote biometric identification by the police as a high-risk application. Other than that, there is really no public sector sort of implication of the law. In fact, the European Union has a common security and foreign policy, and so as per that policy, this act cannot regulate military applications. So there is absolutely nothing military in the law. And then finally, in terms of the legal intervention into scientific and technological expertise, the idea is to intervene as little as possible into these sort of expert fields, except 2 areas. One, the European Union, the Commission asks companies to basically always work with error-free and complete data sets, and we'll get into that. And also, in high-risk applications, provide independent researchers with access to the source code that could be potentially problematic. And also designates emotion recognition as a high-risk application. And so let's hold that thought for a second, because we're going to come back to sort of to these ideas in the specific context of how different stakeholders respond to the Commission. Now, here is a heat map of sort of basic concepts that are associated with typically debates are around AI, so this is more like a supervised algorithm. It's more like a keyword search. And so you can see, well, I hope you can see that some of the ideas are contained in the EU's AI regulation are pretty much contained in business, NGO, trade union, academic, citizen, and public authority discourses as well. So, you know, they all mention things like markets and harms and fundamental rights. But then there are certain ideas that are contained in the responses of some stakeholders, but not necessarily either in the law itself or in the responses of other stakeholders. For example, you know, things like racism. You know, NGOs and academia, at least a few of them, you know, bring up this this concept, whereas it's actually not found in the text of the regulation, or, you know, businesses or trade unions don't seem to be sort of, you know, to be responsive to that wording either. So I'm not going to go over the whole list, but I think, you know, the heat map shows you that there's some degree of convergence in what's being talked about, but then there's also a whole lot of divergence as well. Oh, by the way, I should talk about numbers. So out of the 302 responses, roughly half of them are businesses and business associations. And so businesses take this kind of feedback very seriously. About a quarter are NGOs. And then academia, if I remember correctly, it's like 17 responses or something like that, so a relatively low number. And then with trade unions, EU citizens, and public authorities, again, the numbers are smaller still. And so it's really mostly driven by businesses and business associations, and to a lesser extent by NGOs. And then this is more of a sort of an unsupervised topic model analysis of the different responses coming from businesses, NGOs, academia, trade unions, EU citizens, and public authorities. So what kinds of topics they mention. And you can see that, and again, I'm not going to go into the details, but the businesses and just about everybody else, you know, have no convergence. Like, it seems like even like businesses and academia, they're really talking about different things when they're talking about the AI Act. Except, you know, NGOs seem to be a bit of a bridge there. You know, there's some degree of correspondence between what NGOs mention and academia or academics mention, and you know, as well as, you know, what businesses and NGOs mention. So that is a sort of a more descriptive picture. Now I'm going to move on to an analysis of stakeholders' alternative socio-technical imaginaries. So first of all, quite unlike what the text of the law itself says, many NGOs and some business associations find AI to be disruptive, novel, unprecedented. So, you know, these concepts keep coming up in the feedback from these stakeholders. A lot of NGOs raise the issue of the inherent unpredictability of AI, this likelihood that future-proof legislation will not be that future-proof after all. You know, again, something that the Act itself doesn't entertain as a possibility. And businesses, perhaps not surprisingly, want a predictability through narrow definitions. So one thing that businesses keep complaining about is that, well, these definitions are too vague. You know, we don't want to leave it to sort of future regulators to fill in the gaps. The definition of AI is vague, the definition of risk is vague, et cetera, and et cetera. And so you can see a little bit of a divergence there between some NGOs that are actually a lot more worried about the inherent feature of technology versus businesses that are not that worried about the inherent sort of unpredictability of the technology, but they're more worried about the unpredictability of how the law is going to be interpreted. The desired law, again, this claim to legal certainty is criticized frequently, and perhaps ironically, the elements that the lawmakers thought would make the law a little bit more predictable are precisely the elements that everybody else thinks is going to make the law less useful or less helpful. So again, like this idea of having vague definitions so that they could be filled in later makes businesses very nervous. You know, this idea of starting with initial flexibility and then sort of moving on to implementation. With NGOs and academics, some academics I should say, and some NGOs, the issue is not just, you know, one of filling in the gaps or making the definitions less flexible, but also talking more about the social structural risks posed by AI. So not just talk about case-by-case problems, but also, you know, the problems that AI can generate for society as such. The law itself doesn't really mention that. The socio-technical imaginary of the lawmakers is very much limited to a sort of case-by-case harm mitigation or risk mitigation. And then finally, businesses and some NGOs question data set requirements. So this whole idea of an error-free and complete data set, at least about 60 businesses said that's nonsense. You know, there is no such thing as an error-free data set or a complete data set. Or if actually we had a complete data set, that would contravene GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, you know, that asks to de-identify some elements of data sets. And so, you know, the intervention of the lawmakers into an expert field has received a lot of pushback. And then the second area is this idea of access to code. Businesses have been quite skeptical about whether independent researchers should or can have access to the source code, or if that's going to actually solve problems at all. Now, so that's one area. And then a second area is that some NGOs and academics call for not only the designation of emotion recognition as high risk, but a total ban on it, saying that it's inherently unscientific. And you know, we can get into the sort of the details of this, but there's a sort of a very active research and NGO community that calls emotion recognition basically phrenology, you know, by other means. And so they basically ask the lawmakers to ban it altogether. And again, you can see how that is going to be lawmakers getting involved in scientific and technological debates in a way that they are potentially not very used to. All right, so conclusion. It's too soon to say much. The law has not entirely cleared the legislative process, right? But one thing is that the Commission has a clear perspective on what AI is. By the way, the quotes, it's mine, you know, it's coming from the paper, and how the law should interact with it. Instead of treating AI as a radically unprecedented and unpredictable tool with scientifically or technologically unique features, the proposed bill treats it like just another technology whose risks should be mitigated to safeguard fundamental rights and promote business success. Stakeholders disagree with the Commission and among each other in important ways. And then I should say, well, I should do more research, and perhaps others should do more research on one, the intra-institutional dynamics. So we really don't know still, you know, how the legislation on technology works out inside the European Parliament, much less in the trilogues that are known to be notoriously opaque. And then, you know, we also don't know that much about stakeholder efficacy. Yes, you know, these groups have been writing all these, you know, all this feedback, and they've been lobbying the lawmakers. But at the end of the day, again, you know, the question of stakeholder efficacy is still an open one. All right, so thank you very much. And lest you forget, that's me.
Questions, comments, please.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. I have two sort of semi-related questions, I guess. So the first one is, a lot of like dual-use technology, when we think about, say, nuclear and bio and stuff like that, sort of like the literature emphasis, at least partially, using informal regulations in terms of like code of conduct, professional organizations, especially in the case where technologies are hard to regulate formally. So when it's easy to use, there's big chance of problems and stuff like that. So I'm wondering, is that like a consideration, part and parcel of this act? Do you see it anywhere in the background? That's the first question. And then I'll just also ask the second, which is there like a international sort of part to this, where, you know, whether it be international companies or just foreign governments using data, stuff like that, that's in this whole thing? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll start with the second question. So any business that has customers or that conducts business inside the European Union will be sort of liable in this scheme. So that actually covers a lot of, say, North American companies as well. And so for that reason, yes, I mean, it is going to be international. And I think the European Union, in a way, has tried to move fast with this legislation also because they wanted to be seen as pioneers in technology legislation. I think their sort of view of the GDPR was that it was wildly successful, that it was adopted in California, and other countries are going to sort of take up, or regions of the world will take up privacy legislation, similar to the GDPR. And so I think they're trying to do the same. In terms of informal conduct or codes of conduct, yeah, I mean, actually just this past week, the European Commissioner asked companies to sign on to informal codes of conduct for content moderation and stopping disinformation. And so I think their calculation is that legislation will not be in effect in another 2 years. So until then, at least, some of the damage could be mitigated if the companies self-regulated. And so I think there's some degree of reliance on self-regulation for sure, yeah.
Please.
Sure, thanks. First, thanks for the presentation. I thought it was really informative. I'm just interested in this idea of pluralistic imaginaries, and especially like pluralism with regards to member states in the EU's perspectives. And I guess this touches on your last point up here. But I know Macron has said things to the effect that he envisions like a unique role for France in the development of AI, and other European jurisdictions like Hungary in particular have shown that they're prepared to kind of like skirt EU obligations when it comes to rules. So I'm wondering if in the debate surrounding the AI bill, there was anything to indicate tension maybe with the EU's approach to this, or anything to suggest that it might not be a effective general framework.
Yeah. So this piece of legislation started with a report by a high-level expert group, and so since then, part of the I think guiding idea is sort of maximizing excellence and efficiency, and so there's also that sort of more strategic component, and then every individual state is also free to come up with their own plans for sort of AI development, but I haven't come across much in the European Parliament with respect to sort of country debates, but I think maybe that's because the European Parliament is supposed to be sort of truly supranational. I think at the trilogue stage there might be some more sort of pushback. In terms of specific countries, the German Chamber of Commerce is very active. Like, they're a very active lobby group. I think, they might be sort of perhaps sort of a big player from a specific country. Other than that, I haven't seen much. Again, sort of country by country, either objection or alternative plan for this specific law. In the case of the GDPR, what happens is that every country has their own data privacy authority, and then there is also the EU authority that sort of does vertical integration of those. And so it's going to be possible that maybe the AI will have something like that. There are going to be these like AI commissars or something like that per country, and then it's going to be vertically integrated.
Could BERT be applied to, let's say, transcripts from interviews? So if you wanted to learn about a topic, you could collect a bunch of transcripts, apply BERT, and see what the common points were throughout different experts?
I would say so, yeah. I mean, as long as the amount of data is large, yes, because what BERT does is that it sort of goes through a sentence both ways, and so it adds a little bit more context. By the way, I'm pretty sure there are sort of more advanced topic models coming from the sort of the latest language models. It's just I've been using BERT, and maybe I think it's doing a pretty good job and it's pretty efficient. But yeah, I mean, it can be used for interview data as well. I mean, I think as long as any text can be tokenized into sort of words and sentences, yeah, should be fine.
Secondly, overall, what are the civil society's sentiment towards AI in the European Union?
So Canada is now has the AI and Data Act that is I think that was tabled in 2022. So it's not in effect, but you know, there's a chance that legislation will move forward in Canada as well. I know that Mexico is sort of now in the process of legislating an AI Act. Venezuela is also, I mean, I'm not sure like what specifically they're doing, but I think they have emerging legislation. In the United States, there have been a couple of laws that sort of come and go, you know, in every legislative session. The Algorithmic Accountability Act, I think it came from Senate twice and then nothing really happened. And so I'm not super optimistic, but, you know, there's a chance that maybe one day there's going to be legislation in the United States. But yeah, I mean, and again, like, I don't know if anybody else sort of knows about this, but those are the laws that I'm aware of. Or not laws, rather, bills that I'm aware of. Oh, and civil society sentiment towards AI. I think it's similar to, you know, what we observe in North America. There is a certain degree of skepticism about sort of the applications of AI. That's the sense that I'm getting. I think there were some high-profile cases in Europe as well. In the Netherlands, some sort of housing project, I think, was found. Well, you know, algorithms were basically choosing eligibility requirements, and then some sort of bias was found in the data set, and so that sort of made the headlines in the Netherlands a couple of years ago. In Great Britain, which, well, famously is no longer the EU, but was, I think they use algorithms for educational achievement, and then they scrapped that whole project. And so, you know, there have been some sort of algorithmic applications that were found to be wanting, you know, in the broader European space as well. Yeah, so I think you know, similar skepticism to what we hear here is visible there as well.
Thank you. This is a great paper because it crosses over so many things. I'm curious about two things, or three things actually. First, the Commission's approach to looking at it as, well, just another technology. Is just another technology in market friendliness going to work? Because one could argue that the robot has already left the lab because Google and Microsoft have, you know, got the two big platforms that everybody's using. So, you know, does the Commission want a European champion? Does the Commission want 28 national champions to grow and merge? And sort of the definition of market friendly is, I'd be interested in what you would interpret that as, or what else would one wish to know as it moves forward through the European legislative process. The second issue, I think, is about the fundamental rights, because in your heat map, when you had the 300-odd comments, now if I've understood the heat map right, racism is sort of way down low on the list and unprecedented. Now, you know, that might be just the number of times racism was mentioned, but one can look at some of the data sets that may be being used, whether it's in the Netherlands or elsewhere, and the big controversies in the United States are about the data sets and algorithmic bias. And it's not obvious to me how you would converge on a Commission regulation about that, given that what's racism in Hungary might be quite different from what's racism in France, which might be different from what's racism in Italy or Germany. And then your last point is there needs to be more research, absolutely. And this area, you know, like if you look at the three big ecosystems, there's China, there's the United States, and there's Europe. What would be maybe the two big things, that the two levers you would pull next in terms of research that would move in the direction that, given that there's a moving legislative target and regulatory target in Europe, what would be the two levers you'd pull next in this area? Thanks.
All right, thank you. So, Yeah, the Commission's logic, I think, was that here's a new technology, and we want to make it appealing to, well, we want to make regulation, legal regulation, appealing to businesses. And so I think their rhetorical strategy, therefore, was to say, look, if we have regulation, it's not bad for business. It's actually good for business. And why? That's because, now you're going to have clear definitions and clear liability schemes, and so you can actually develop your technologies. And so in that way, I think instead of seeing legislation as a restriction, they wanted to sort of give the sense that legislation is a constructive force for business. And that's why they believe that legal certainty and market friendliness sort of go together. And I think part of that strategy is to say that nothing unpredictable is going to happen within the realm of the law, because it's future-proof and it's technology neutral, and so we got you covered forever. So I think that's the sort of the rhetorical strategy that illuminates the Commission. I think a lot of it is going to be down to implementation. I mean, obviously, because again, the definitions are intentionally vague. I think at the implementation stage, yeah, probably there are going to be national sort of champions or authorities that are going to sort of fill in the gaps. So I'm really expecting the future of this sort of process to be very contentious. I think there's going to be more rather than less debate over these definitions, going into the future. In terms of racism, yeah, I mean, in that heat map, it's very low on the list because the text of the regulation doesn't mention it at all. I don't know. I mean, it could be that I think, especially in the United States, there is a specific way of talking about like social injustice that is generally mediated through sort of the language of institutional racism and sexism. So I don't know if the European internal debates reflect the same sensitivities quite to the same extent. So I'm not sure if that's part of it. It could be that in some European countries, racial characteristics may not be protected categories, and so maybe, because in the United States, collecting data based on race is actually a more normalized procedure than maybe many other parts of the world. And so that could be a reason why maybe the issue doesn't come up as prominently as it does. And then finally, yeah, I mean the levers for future research. I mean, it's going to be interesting. I think one area of research, I think, will be also administrative bodies, administrative agencies. In the United States, I think the FTC will end up playing a big role just because there is no sort of clear issue-specific legislation. I think in the Canadian landscape, it could be very similar. Administrative bodies might fill in gaps that sort of legislation leaves open. I know much less about sort of the ecosystem of regulation in China, but what I know is that despite all the fears in North America that China is going to develop all the technologies that we are not developing here because of regulation, it's not as simplistic as that. I think both the government and companies in China are also treading it carefully, so they're not just trying to sort of come up with the Terminator version just tomorrow. It's not as simple as that. So I think future research will have to look into not just the legislation, but yeah, administrative bodies, but also self-regulation and how those three sort of interact.
I love your paper. Quick question: we hear maybe not enough about the people that are pushing back against this kind of legislation, the lobby groups. You mentioned one. Can you tell us a little bit about the landscape of those lobby groups in the EU? Who are they? What are they focused on?
Yeah, of course. So the European Union has a transparency requirement, and so as long as you put your name down in a registry, you can lobby sort of officially and legitimately within the European Union. And so a lot of those lobby groups are like chambers of, I don't know, industry or commerce and banking and things like that. So you see a lot of the response papers coming from, I don't know, German Chamber of Commerce or Spanish Banking Association and things like that. Also, big tech companies, the ones that are mostly based in the United States, have become official lobbies. So Facebook Ireland, as well as like Mozilla Group or Microsoft, Google, they all do sort of official lobbying. And then this is more journalism. Don't quote me on it, but a lot of journalists are sort of pointing to improper lobbying these days. That is to say, a group actually registers as an academic institution or an NGO, but they are sort of like a shadow lobby, or they're a front for a sort of major corporation or corporate interests, and so that's how they do sort of their improper lobbying. Now, in terms of how the procedure of lobbying works, I'm a little bit less clear on that because there are 735 members of European Parliament, so it's hard to really have them in your pocket. But I think the stage of decision making that gets a little bit more opaque in the European Union is the trilogue. So, towards the end of European Parliament debates, there is that stage with the Commission, Council, and the EP sort of getting together and ironing out the differences. Nobody knows what's happening inside them. I mean, somebody must, but at least no researcher knows what's happening inside them. And so there could be some shady stuff going on in there, but that's again more speculation than an actual sort of verified fact. But yeah.
Thank you.
What did you mean by not using emotional information? And also, does that tie into the racism topic in the sense that there could be some major blind spots in the intelligence if it's not able to be used?
Yeah. So emotion recognition is supposed to be an area of research that is similar to facial recognition, except that it doesn't just recognize a face, but it recognizes emotion. Say, if I'm excited or nervous or distressed or happy or whatever. And so for those who advocate for emotion recognition, they say, maybe a little bit bombastically, but they say that this could stop terrorist threats, like people who are doing something illegal might have a particular sort of disposition to behave, etc., and so that could be stopped, etc. For those who criticize, emotion recognition is likely to go awry because it might punish neurodiverse people to begin with, right? It might end up its errors might end up actually like discriminating against people who in no way deserve it, and so I think that's the debate, and again, for those who are critical, they believe that again it's similar to phrenology. It's actually not a science at all. It sounds sciencey, but it's it's based on sort of a completely wrong priors as a scientific method, and so. That's why they want it banned. They believe that it doesn't bring any social benefit, but it might actually cause a lot of social harm.
How much discussion was there about where the EU falls between China and America? In North America, we often have there's this kind of mental model that there are two internets being created, an American one and a Chinese one, and the Europeans have to decide where they're going. Does that factor at all into those conversations, or is that just something we think Europeans think, or we think the EU thinks?
No, great question, and I think Macron's latest visit to China, I think that was the one inflection point, right, where a lot of people were like here is a European leader who is sort of charting a course, sort of independent course, and maybe sort of warming up to China. I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen much discourse, to be honest, about like positioning themselves sort of either in between the U.S. or North America and China, or in some ways charting an independent course or anything like that. I think the European Union has, I mean, obviously, a lot of the countries within the European Union have like hate speech laws and stuff like that, and so their interpretation of content moderation in the European space is very different from the sort of the U.S. notion of First Amendment plus Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act, you know, adding up to little or no regulation, except in some of the most egregious crimes. I think in the European space, it's acknowledged that there is going to be more content moderation. This is not something I'm talking about in this paper, but they legislated the Digital Services Act. It could be the Hidden AI Act, actually, because that one is about content moderation and making what they call making things that are offline illegal, illegal online. And so in that sense, I think the European landscape is going to be a lot more regulated than the sort of the American one.
Thanks. I was just wondering, within your topic models, if you did any sentiment analysis, and if you did, if there was any sort of consensus or disagreement in the sentiment behind the topics that they were talking about.
I didn't, and I think a big part of it is that the text of the law is very dry. So I wasn't sure if I could elicit any sentiment from it, and so I decided not to do that.
Okay. But even in the responses?
That's a good one. Yeah, maybe I should. Yeah, I should try it. Yeah, because I mean, my sense is that it's going to be a little bit, well, not necessarily angry. I think it's more like people who do a good job of encapsulating their anger in legalese, but still, but yeah, probably, well, I should at least try, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious because so many groups are talking about bias, but are they talking about bias in the same way, right? With the same sentiment behind that.
Yeah, and also look like to check to see if some words actually mean the same thing, right? Like bias is a very famous one because I think in everyday language we use it as discrimination towards some people, whereas sometimes the word bias really just means statistical bias, and so it's a little bit more technical than that. So yeah, I mean things. Yeah, I should look into maybe word associations if the words mean the same thing to different groups. Yeah, thank you.
Join me in thanking Onur for a really provocative paper. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you.